I have yet to do a wrap up. I've just been so busy traveling with family and friends, and I've been reading in between, but I just haven't found the time to sit down and give you guys a summary and my basic thoughts about a lot of the books that I've read. So here I am. I am ready and prepared kind of to talk about all of the books that I read in the past few months. So if you guys are ready to either jot some books down or take them off of your TBR list, sit down, grab some tea, and let's get talking. So first of all, I want to say that I think I read about 21 books this past few months, and I don't have an exact number, and I could be leaving out some books, so I'm really sorry if I do. I'm also not going to be talking about the books in chronological order because, to be real, it's been a while since I've read some of these books, and I don't remember the exact timeline of them. So without further ado, let's get started. So the first book that I read was The Queen of Nothing by Holly Black, and I also read The Wicked King by Holly Black, and these are the second and third installments in the Cruel Prince Folk of the Air trilogy, and this is just about Jude, who is a mortal who was stolen away with her sister by her father when her mother gets murdered by him, and she basically finds out that he's a fairy, and she lives in this fairy world that's very brutal, and there's this boy named Prince Garden, and he hates humans, and he doesn't really like her, and this could possibly be enemies to lovers. Oh my god, my hair. I rated both of these books 5 stars. They were super hard to put down. I really enjoyed them, and honestly, I still have very fond memories of the series, which just proves that it's a really good, solid 5-star read for me because it has clearly impacted me, and it's definitely something I would come back to in the future. If you guys haven't read the Folk of the Air trilogy and you guys enjoy fairies, you like Akatar, or you like enemies to lovers, then I would definitely recommend checking this out. You will not be disappointed. Along the same lines is How the King of Elfame Learned to Hate Stories by Holly Black. I would not recommend reading this book unless you truly enjoy the Folk of the Air trilogy. This is basically a little storybook that gives insight of Prince Carden's life and has a couple stories of the future and a little bit of Carden and Jude's relationship. I think that if you guys really enjoyed reading the trilogy and you want maybe a little bit more backstory or content, this is definitely a book to go for. I do kind of wish I didn't purchase this book and maybe just picked it up from the library because although I do really enjoy it, I don't think it's something that I would read again in the future, but there are tons of fun artwork inside to complement the stories, and I just felt like it was very fun. I would rate this book 4 stars. The next book that I read was The Secret Identity of Devin, Delaney by Lauren Barnholt, and this was part of the Studio Ghibli readathon that I co-hosted with a bunch of amazing booktubers. This is just one of like those nostalgic middle school reads that I really liked, where this girl named Devin Delaney lies about being popular when she's away with her grandmother, and turns out her best friend there moves to her school and she has to basically fake it till she makes it, and it's just a fun time. Also kind of cringy reading when you're older, but it was very nostalgic for me, and I would just give it a 5-star purely because it made me smile. The next book that I read was Howls Moving Castle, which was actually the group book for our Studio Ghibli readathon. It's about Sophie, who is the eldest of 3 daughters, and she works as a hat maker until she is cursed into being an old woman, and so she goes out to find this wizard to help her reverse the curse, and there might be romance and adventure along the way. If you guys have seen the Studio Ghibli film of Howl's Moving Castle and you really enjoyed it, I wouldn't necessarily recommend reading this book because for me it was very plain. I wasn't very intrigued and I found myself skimming at times. There's not really anything memorable about it, and although there were certain plot differences from the book and the movie, I just didn't really enjoy the book at all, and honestly I'm going to be unhauling it at some point. I would rate this probably like a 2.5 star. The next book that I read recently was Brazen Rebel Ladies Who Rocked the World by Penelope Bagu, and if you guys haven't seen my vlog with Noelle's taste test, then you guys should definitely go do that. Let's just say that I was very much not disappointed. I loved it. I loved the artwork. I loved the history, and I loved hearing more about amazing women because honestly, I feel like history books are so saturated with stories about men, and there really isn't that much about women who have made a difference, and I thought it was really cool to just have this book that celebrated all the incredible things that women have done throughout the years. The next book that I read was Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo, and this is how I know I haven't done a wrap up in a really long time because I read this in early May, I think. This is the sequel and final installment, I think, to Six of Crows. If you guys don't know what that is, it's about this group of misfits who try to pull off an elaborate heist, and it's a very character-driven storyline where you get different points of view every other chapter, and so you get to know all these characters really deeply and kind of feel almost like you know them as a family member. I will say one of my regrets with this book is that I read it when I was kind of in a reading slump, and I made it halfway through the book really enjoying it. But then life just got ahead of me and I got really stressed out and busy and put it down for a couple of weeks. And so by the time I picked it up again, even though I finished it, I don't really feel like it had that snowball effect on me that I wanted because I was already kind of detached. I still cried, I still felt like it was really beautiful, but I think I would definitely want to go and reread this again because I don't think it like hit me as hard as it's supposed to. I would rate this book a 5-star because honestly the writing is beautiful and I am in love with all the characters. The next book that I read was 1,000 Boy Kisses by Tilly Cole. It's about this boy named Rune, and he's 17 years old, and he returns to Georgia where he spent a lot of his years with the love of his life, Poppy Litchfield, and he's really angry at her because she randomly broke things off when they were doing long distance and he doesn't really know why, and he's really salty at her. Like, definitely bad boy energy, kind of enemies to lovers, but like not really. I really liked this book for a good chunk of it, but I was left feeling really unsatisfied with the ending, and I definitely felt like certain parts of the book were super cheesy for me, but it was a beautiful story, and I think overall, now that I think of it and think of how fast I just kind of flew through the pages, I would probably rate this book a 4 stars because I enjoyed it, but the ending kind of made me like, what? The next book that I read was Birthday Girl by Penelope Douglas. If you guys are noticing, I'm actually starting to read romance now. And actually, one of my really good friends here on BookTube, from Bookish Potatoes, recommended this to me. I ended up really loving this book. I would give it a 4.5 stars. I thought it was really steamy, and it's an age gap romance about this girl who basically might have a thing for her boyfriend's dad. I was really satisfied with how it progressed, but if you like the steam and the sauce, then definitely give this one a try. I really had a fun time reading it. I think I read it in like 2 sittings. The next book that I read was Verity by Colleen Hoover, and oh my gosh, I loved this book so much that I finished it in 1 sitting, which is honestly really rare for me now because I've been so busy with work and just life in general, but I literally could not put this down. This is a psychological thriller about this girl named Lowen, and she's a struggling writer who's, you know, really trying to make ends meet when she's approached by a man who offers to pay her this really huge sum to finish his wife's work because she's a very successful author. She ends up uncovering this autobiography that this writer slash wife wrote that has a bunch of stuff that doesn't really seem like she wants the public to know about, and it's kind of screwed up. In the midst of all this, there's a romance element, kind of like love triangle sort of, and the wife, by the way, is also injured and she's bedridden, and so Lowen is like living in her house and this love triangle is going on, and it's very creepy. Definitely got that psychological thriller element to it, but it was just really good and the ending had me shook. So if you guys like psychological thrillers, behind closed doors, anything like that, definitely go check this out because it was really interesting. I would rate this book a 5-star, and I would recommend this to anybody. The next book that I read was Daytripper by Fabio Moon and Gabriella Ba. I really liked this graphic novel. I also read this for Noelle's 7 Pages taste test. This is about a man named Ross who is an obituary writer, and basically it's kind of alternate realities where every chapter is a different day in his life where he dies, but because there's all these different alternate realities, you get to kind of know him as a person as the chapters go on and get more backstory and all the side characters in his life, and I just felt like it really resonated with me, which is very rare, I feel like, for a graphic novel. It had a lot of deep content in it, and a lot of the dialogue that was exchanged between the characters really made you think about life and the concept of death and what death means to you and means to like family members, and I just felt like it was a very reflective read. I would say now that I've let it like process, I would give it a 4.5-star read, but I really enjoyed it. The next book that I read was Infinite Country by Patricia Engel. This tells the story of a Colombian family. Half of them are in the US and half of them are in Colombia, and the daughter, who's in juvie, she escapes and she's trying to make it to America to be with her mom and sisters. I know this book is a very important story, and I really appreciated and enjoyed like learning more. I don't really remember too much about this book, to be honest, and the reason why was because even though there were a lot of very hard-hitting points throughout the book. I just wasn't really connecting with the writing, so I would honestly give this rating a 2.5 star. The next book that I read was Spin the Dawn by Elizabeth Lim, and this is kind of Project Runway meets Mulan, which is really cool. The main character's name is Maya, and she works as a seamstress in her father's workshop. When he's asked to come and make garments for the king, she basically realizes that he's not in any kind of state to be doing that, and she disguises herself as a boy and goes to the palace where she might encounter magic and love and all that kind of stuff. I really enjoyed this book, but I wouldn't say that it was like the best book I've ever read. It was just kind of a really fun read. I wasn't emotional in the romance or anything like that. I think the part that I really liked hearing about was the fashion aspect, as well as the lore that was kind of tied into the storyline. Because I wasn't as attached to all the characters, I would give it a 4 to 4.5 star rating. The next book that I read was In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. So In the Dream House is a memoir that talks about Carmen's toxic and emotionally abusive relationship with her girlfriend, and she basically walks you through it through different styles of writing. I think it's very interesting because she uses different like writing forms and different comparisons to a play or a movie scene that kind of gives you clues of what happened in the relationship, and so in a way you're kind of piecing together as you go along. I felt like this book was incredibly electrifying and very sad. As someone who's been in an emotionally abusive relationship, I could relate a lot to the emotions and feelings that the narrator expressed, and honestly, it just broke my heart because I think that it is true that a lot of people go through these toxic relationships and don't really know how toxic it is at the time. Overall, I would say that if you enjoy nonfiction books or poetry, it's so engaging that you'll definitely enjoy this. The next book that I read recently was We Hunt the Flame, and this was actually the August Fantasy Series book club pick. Oh my god, have I been out of focus this whole time? Okay. And honestly, I would rate it a 3.5 stars. This is about Zafira, who's a hunter who disguises herself as a man to hunt in the cursed forest of Ars to feed her people. Nasir is the Prince of Death who assassinates those foolish enough to defy his autocratic father, the Sultan. If Zafira is exposed as a girl, all of her achievements will be rejected. If Nasir displays his compassion, his father will punish him in the most brutal of ways. Both Zafira and Nasir are legends in the kingdom of Arawaya, but neither wants to be. War is brewing, and the Ars sweeps closer with each passing day, engulfing the land in shadow. While Zafira embarks on a quest to uncover a lost artifact that can restore magic to her suffering world and stop the Ars, Nasir is sent by the Sultan on a similar mission to retrieve the artifact and kill the hunter. But an ancient evil stirs as their journey unfolds, and the prize they seek may pose a threat greater than either can imagine. So I'm currently reading the sequel right now, so I should know how to give a great synopsis for this book, but I just didn't want to leave any information out, and I feel like this is the kind of book that is a bit complicated to explain in a few sentences, so that's why I went ahead and just read it to you guys. I am just gonna give you guys a spoiler right now. I'm on the second book. That's actually my current read, and I'm actually really enjoying it. I think right now it would be a 4-star read for me, but this book itself, We Hunt the Flame, I would say it was a 3.5 star rating. I enjoyed it at parts, and it was definitely interesting at parts, and there was nothing really wrong with the story, but it really seemed to drag for me. I could tell that I wasn't really that engaged because people would die and I wouldn't be crying. Overall though, I know a lot of people who do love the book, so I wouldn't let my opinion hinder you. The next book that I read was Red Rising by Pierce Brown, and this is about a dystopian society where Darrow is working for the chance to make Mars habitable and allow generations to come to reside there successfully, and after a tragedy occurs, he basically finds out that Mars has been inhabited for years, and he's actually part of a slave class that keeps the rich wealthy, and thus begins his ascending to gain revenge. I really enjoyed this book. I would rate it a 4-star rating. The only reason why my rating's not 5 stars is because I don't think it's the book for me. It was good and it was really enticing, but I am a pretty anxious person and I can do thrillers, but I was getting really attached to the characters in the book, and it definitely has more of that ruthless Game of Thrones kind of vibe, which really isn't for me. There was also a lot of gore and sensitive topics, like too many to count, so it just was a bit too violent and gruesome for me. My boyfriend, on the other hand, loves it, but I did enjoy the writing style, I did enjoy the characters. I wasn't like obsessed with the protagonist, but I think that's the whole point. If you guys like science fiction, dystopian, definitely give this a try. It's a fun time for sure, it's just, it was too much for me. The next book that I read was The Mighty Heart of Sunny St. James. This book is about Sunny St. James, who recently gets a new heart, and she decides to go out and do all the things that she previously wasn't able to do. She wants to kiss a boy, she wants to make a new best friend because she had a falling out with her old one, and she wants to go out and live a crazy fun summer. She eventually meets Quinn, who has serious best friend potential, but she might realize that she might not just want to be friends with Quinn. I rated this book 5 stars. I felt like Sunny was the most wholesome character. She was so sweet and full of life, and I loved Quinn and how Quinn just believed and like was the best for Sunny. I would recommend this book to anyone who likes YA contemporary or romance because it's honestly really cute. 5-star read. I really liked it. The next book that I read was Wild by Cheryl Strayed, and this is a memoir about Cheryl and how at the age of 22 she thought she lost everything. Her mother passed away and she got distant from her family, and at the age of 26 she decides to make the decision to embark on the Pacific Crest Trail from the Mojave Desert through California and Oregon to Washington State by herself, having no experience doing any sort of serious camping trip. If you guys want to hear my honest thoughts of this book, I'd recommend watching my Noelle Swin Pages vlog for it because I actually have some pretty cool footage. I actually brought this book with me to Utah when I was canoeing through the Green River, which was super exciting, and I actually did that on purpose so I could read about Cheryl's adventures in the outdoors while braving my own fears of the outdoors. I'm not a very outdoorsy person, so it was definitely very comforting to have this to read with me. This book made me cry and sob and tear up and laugh. I just have so much awe for Cheryl and her strength and her perseverance. I don't know how she did it, but it's honestly incredible, and I could not recommend this book more. It is incredible, a 5-star read, and this is a book that I'm going to keep in my bookshelf for a very long time. The next book that I read was A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. I have not read any of her books before, but I've heard so much about it on BookTube and Book Talk, and I wanted to see what the hype was about. And honestly, okay, I was like 150 pages in and I was kind of in it, and then I got another 100 pages in and I was hooked. I finished the book in like 3 days. It was incredible, and it just kept getting better the more I read. There was spiciness, but there was also dark fantasy and all these fairy incorporations because this is a fairy retelling of Beauty and the Beast essentially. It was so much better than I could have ever hoped for, and I'm truly excited to read the second book of the series. If I didn't say so already, this was definitely a 5-star read and one of my favorite reads of the summer. Finally, I read The Maidens by Alex Michaelides, and if you guys have followed me from day 1 or day 2 or day 3, I love The Silent Patient. It's one of my favorite thrillers of all time. I know it's not technically supposed to be a psychological thriller, but I'm just gonna label it as that because it really spooked me out and kept me on my toes. I was super excited to pick this up. I felt like the synopsis for the story was so interesting. It's basically about this woman. Her niece's best friend is found murdered, and she goes to take care of her niece, and she becomes convinced that this professor named Edward Fosca is responsible for these murders, of these brutal killings of like university girls, but there's no evidence to prove it, and so she begins going headfirst into investigating for herself. I finished it in one sitting once again. It was so captivating. I didn't see the plot twist, but a lot of people told me they did. I rate this book a 4 out of 5 stars, and the reason why is because I really feel like there could have been more backstory because there were so many unanswered questions that I had, and I went and like looked this stuff up, but there was no information about it, and I don't know, I like to have my answers. It wasn't supposed to be an open-ended book, that's the thing. It's supposed to have made me feel like everything was tied up in a little bow. But unfortunately, like, I really just felt frustrated because there were a lot of things I wanted expanded in the story. That's my only complaint about it. However, I still really enjoyed this book. He did it again. He's caught me off guard again, and I love him for it. So those are all the books that I read in the past couple of months. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know it's super lengthy and long. This is probably going to be a pain for me to edit because I mumble like no one else's business. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'm really looking forward to, you know, more consistent wrap-ups. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I'd love to hear in the comments down below if you have read any of the books that I talked about, and let me know if you loved a book that I read and if you hated it, and if you completely disagree with everything I said in this wrap-up. But I'll talk to you guys in my next video, and I'll see you soon. Bye!